Cassandra rolled her eyes. "You're overthinking," she sighed, her voice dripping with forced patience. I said nothing, just smiled. That was the last time she would ever dismiss me so easily. For months, I had felt something shift. It was in the way she held her phone closer to her chest, the way her laughter on late-night calls was quieter, more secretive, the way she would claim exhaustion after work but return home with a glow that had nothing to do with stress. The signs were subtle, but I always noticed. At first, I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just paranoia, I told myself. Maybe I was looking for something that wasn't there. But the small, nagging doubts turned into something heavier, something undeniable. The scent of cologne that wasn't mine. A single text preview flashing on her screen. "Can't wait to see you again." The slight hesitation in her kisses. As if she was somewhere else entirely. Still, I said nothing. Accusations without proof meant nothing to a woman like Cassandra. She was clever, manipulative, always ready to twist words into weapons, to turn guilt into a burden I would be forced to carry. No! I wouldn't give her that power. Instead, I watched. I became a ghost in my own home, moving silently, collecting fragments of her deceit like pieces of a puzzle only I knew how to solve. I started with the basics, checking our shared bank statements, a hotel charge, another one, a fancy dinner at a restaurant I had never been invited to. She must have thought I was a fool. Then came the GPS logs on her car, weekly trips to the same hotel, a pattern so predictable it almost made me laugh. I hired a private investigator, someone discreet, someone who knew how to find the truth hidden beneath carefully curated lies. And oh, what truth he found. Photographs, crisp, undeniable. Cassandra slipping into a hotel room with Ryan, the man who thought he was safe. Their intimate exchanges caught frame by frame. And then the messages. Sweet nothings, inside jokes, plans for a future that did not include me. It took everything in me not to confront her right then and there. Instead, I played my part perfectly. I kissed her goodnight, told her I loved her, let her bask in the illusion of her cleverness. I let her believe she had fooled me, that she was untouchable, but I was waiting for the perfect moment, for the night that would leave her breathless, not from passion, but from devastation. Our anniversary, she expected a romantic dinner, a celebration of our years together. She expected flowers, champagne, whispered affections. What she didn't expect was the envelope. And when I handed it to her, smiling softly across the candlelit table, her world began to unravel. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, every lie she ever told. "Still think I'm overthinking?" I whispered. Then I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked away to freedom. The moment I decided to seek the truth, I knew there would be no turning back. Once suspicion takes root, it spreads like a disease, infecting everything, every conversation, every glance, every touch. The weight of unspoken words sat heavy in the air between Cassandra and me, but she didn't notice. She was too comfortable in her web of lies, too convinced of her own brilliance to realize she was being watched. I played my role flawlessly. I was the devoted husband, the man who kissed her forehead before she left for her late meetings and asked nothing when she returned home smelling of hotel linen instead of her usual perfume. If she caught me watching her too closely, I would simply smile, act distracted, give her a reason to believe I was too wrapped up in my own world to see what was happening right in front of me. But I saw everything. The first real crack appeared on a Wednesday. Cassandra was in the shower when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She never left it unattended. That alone was a red flag. I watched the screen light up, displaying a message preview. "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you." I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to. My pulse remained steady, my breathing controlled, even as a cold fury settled in my bones. She thought she was being careful, but all it took was one moment of carelessness, one slip, for the illusion to shatter. That night, I took the first real step toward my revenge. I had already started tracking her movements weeks before, noting the days she came home late, the excuses she used, the times she seemed distracted. I installed a GPS tracker on her car, just a small device under the wheel well, nothing she would ever notice. It told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't working late. She wasn't with friends. She was meeting him, the man she thought was her little secret, the one who smirked at me from the shadows, probably laughing at the fool Cassandra believed me to be. I hired a private investigator the very next morning. I didn't trust my own emotions to handle this cleanly, and I needed evidence, hard, undeniable proof, not just for me, but for her. For the moment I would lay it all out in front of her, watching as the ground beneath her crumbled. The investigator, a seasoned man named Keller, was efficient. Within days, he provided photos. Cassandra and Ryan at a high-end restaurant, their hands grazing over candlelight. More photos followed, her sneaking out of the office early, slipping into his car, their bodies too close for anything innocent. Then came the hotel bookings, the records of her name and his on the same check-in log. When Keller handed me the envelope containing everything, he studied my face. "Most men lose it at this point," he said, his tone neutral. "You're calm." I met his gaze. "I've been waiting for this," I replied, "and I'm not done yet." Because proof was not enough. Proof could be denied, twisted into something else. No, I needed more. I dug deeper. I went through our bank statements, tracing every suspicious charge. I found receipts for expensive gifts that had never reached me. Designer watches, cologne, dinners in places she had never mentioned. I even checked her emails, her social media messages, anything that could confirm what I already knew. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. She was living a second life, a life where I was nothing more than a background character, a man she had outgrown, someone too mundane to hold her interest. Yet every morning she kissed me goodbye. Every night she slept in my bed. The audacity of it burned. And so I planned. Cassandra had always been meticulous about celebrations, especially when they centered around her. Our anniversary was no exception. She had hinted at it for weeks, suggesting I surprise her, reminiscing about past years when I had taken her to luxurious places. This year, she expected something even grander, something worthy of her. She had no idea what I had in store. The night before our anniversary, I watched her as she lay beside me, scrolling through her phone, smiling at whatever was on the screen. Was it him? Was she texting him while lying in bed with me? I turned away, suppressing the rage simmering beneath my skin. Tomorrow, she would understand. Tomorrow, she would see that I was never the fool she thought I was. When the evening arrived, I dressed in my best suit, playing the part of the devoted husband to perfection. Cassandra wore a red dress, sleek and elegant, her hairstyle just the way I had always liked it. She leaned in at the restaurant, touching my hand lightly. "You've been so quiet today," she murmured, tilting her head in feigned concern. "Something on your mind?" I smiled. "Not at all," I said smoothly. "I was just thinking about how much I love surprises." Her lips curled into a slow smile. "You planned something special?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope. She frowned slightly. "What's this?" "Open it," I said. She hesitated, sensing something. I could see it in her eyes, the first flicker of doubt, the first inkling that something was off. But she played along, peeling back the flap and sliding out the contents. The first photo slipped onto the table, then another, and another. Her breath hitched. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through them. Images of her and Ryan, each more damning than the last. The restaurant around us faded into silence. She looked up at me, her face pale, lips parted, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. I leaned in, keeping my voice low, controlled. "Still think I'm overthinking?" Cassandra blinked rapidly, struggling to compose herself. Her mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. For the first time, she was speechless, and it was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. Cassandra stared at the photographs in stunned silence. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled as they traced the edges of the damning evidence, each image capturing a lie she could no longer escape. The flickering candlelight on the restaurant table cast shadows across her face, highlighting the sudden pallor in her cheeks. Her lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time since I had met her, she was truly speechless. I let the silence stretch. I wanted her to feel it, the weight of her own deception, the suffocating reality of being exposed with nowhere to run. She had spent months, maybe longer, weaving a careful web of deceit, manipulating conversations, dismissing my concerns with effortless arrogance. But now, as the evidence lay before her, there was nothing left for her to twist. No clever excuse that could save her. She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly as if willing herself to wake from a nightmare. "Adam," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the quiet murmur of the restaurant. This isn't what you think." I raised an eyebrow, a slow smirk forming on my lips. "Oh?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms as I studied her. "Then why don't you explain it to me, Cassandra? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like what I think." She reached for my hand instinctively, as if our years of marriage would grant her a shred of mercy. But I didn't move. I watched as she hesitated, withdrawing her hand like she had touched something scalding. Her mind was racing. I could see it in her eyes. She was calculating, trying to determine whether to deny, beg, or shift the blame. She chose denial first. These pictures, they don't mean anything, she said, forcing out a hollow laugh. You're being dramatic, Adam. Ryan and I, he's just a friend. Someone I confided in. A friend? I repeated slowly, tilting my head. A friend you meet at a hotel? A friend you hold hands with over candlelit dinners? A friend you whisper sweet nothings to in messages? She flinched. I reached into my jacket pocket again, retrieving my phone. With a few taps, I pulled up the screenshots, the texts, the messages where she told Ryan how much she missed him, how much she loved him. I placed the phone on the table, letting her see it. Her breath caught. Her mask was cracking now, splitting at the seams. The once confident, untouchable Cassandra was crumbling under the weight of cold, undeniable truth. She tried again. Adam, I never meant for it to go this far, she pleaded, her voice breaking. It was a mistake. I was lonely. I cut her off with a quiet chuckle, shaking my head. Lonely? I echoed. You were lonely? That's the excuse you're going with? Her eyes glistened, and for a moment I almost believed the tears were real. Almost. But I had spent too long preparing for this moment to fall for another one of her performances. I exhaled sharply, pushing my chair back. The sudden scrape of wood against tile made her jump. Adam, wait, she gasped, reaching for me again. This time I let her fingers brush against mine before I pulled away, watching her face fall as I stood up. I adjusted my jacket, smoothing down the sleeves, moving with slow precision, deliberate, calculated. I wanted her to feel the anticipation, to let the dread settle deep into her bones. I picked up the envelope, placing it neatly in front of her. This, I said, my voice calm but firm, is everything. Every lie, every betrayal, every ounce of proof you could ever need. She stared at it as if it would burst into flames. And do you know what the best part is? I continued, lowering my voice so only she could hear. I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to cause a scene. I don't need to. Because this, I gestured at the evidence in front of her, this speaks louder than anything I could ever say. Cassandra's hands balled into fists. She was shaking now, whether from anger, humiliation, or sheer terror, I didn't know. And I didn't care. Adam, please, she whispered, voice thick with desperation. We can fix this. We can talk about this in private, just you and me. I laughed softly, shaking my head. There is no we anymore, Cassandra. You made sure of that the moment you decided I wasn't enough for you. I reached into my pocket one last time, this time pulling out my wedding ring. Slowly, deliberately, I placed it on the table beside the envelope. She gasped softly, her eyes widening as she looked from the ring to me, realization hitting her like a freight train. Adam, I turned, walking away without looking back. As I stepped toward the exit, I caught sight of our waiter watching from a distance, his brows furrowed in quiet curiosity. I gave him a nod before pulling out my wallet and placing enough cash on the table to cover our meal. Cassandra would be left with the bill for her own betrayal. I didn't stop as I walked out of the restaurant, the crisp night air hitting my face. As I stepped outside, behind me, I knew she was still sitting there, staring at the evidence, at the ring, at the life she had just lost. I pulled out my phone, scrolling past her desperate texts that had started flooding in. The final message appeared. Adam, please, can we talk? I smirked, my thumb hovering over the screen for a moment. Then, with the same calm precision I had carried through this entire process, I blocked her number. Without hesitation, without regret. And as I walked down the street, I finally felt it. Freedom. The night air was crisp as I stepped out of the restaurant, leaving Cassandra alone with the evidence of her downfall. The sound of my footsteps echoed against the pavement, each step carrying me further away from the wreckage of our marriage. I didn't look back. There was no need. I had seen everything I needed to see. The shock, the fear, the desperate plea forming on her lips as I walked away. That image was seared into my memory, and for the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. I had won, not by screaming, not by causing a scene, not by indulging in petty revenge. I had won by doing what Cassandra never expected, by being patient, by being quiet, by waiting until the perfect moment to strike. I reached my car, unlocking it with a slow exhale. My fingers tapped against the steering wheel as I sat there for a moment, staring ahead, letting it all sink in. It was over. The lies, the manipulation, the late-night suspicions that had kept me awake long after she had fallen asleep beside me, believing she had fooled me. Yet, the phone buzzed beside me. I glanced down. Cassandra, Adam, please. Just talk to me. Block. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat, putting the car in drive. I didn't go home right away. Home still smelled like her perfume, like the ghost of the life we had built together. I wasn't ready for that just yet. Instead, I drove. The city lights blurred past me, neon signs flickering in the distance, couples walking hand in hand, laughing, oblivious to the quiet storm I had just left behind. It was strange how the world kept moving as if nothing had happened, as if my life hadn't just shifted in an irreversible way. After some time, I found myself parked outside an old bar I hadn't been to in years. A place I used to go before Cassandra and I were married, back when life had been simpler. I stepped inside, the scent of whiskey and aged wood greeting me like an old friend. The bartender, a man who had probably seen his fair share of broken souls, nodded in silent acknowledgement as I took a seat. What ill it be? I thought for a moment before answering. Whiskey. Neat. He poured the amber liquid into the glass, sliding it across the counter. I picked it up, taking a slow sip, letting the burn settle in my chest. It was strange, really. I had imagined this moment so many times, pictured how it would feel to finally expose her, to walk away with the upper hand. And yet, sitting here, staring at the worn counter beneath my fingers, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty. Not sad, not regretful, just empty. I had spent months preparing for this, focusing every ounce of my energy on proving her betrayal, on ensuring she felt every ounce of humiliation I had suffered in silence. But now that it was done, now that she was left to drown in the mess she had made, I found myself wondering, what now? What did I do with the years I had given her, the memories that were now tainted, the love I had once believed was real? The whiskey burned on the way down as I took another sip, shaking my head at myself. That was the thing about betrayal. It didn't just destroy the person responsible, it destroyed everything. Another buzz from my phone, I almost ignored it, but something in me told me to look. Not Cassandra this time, Ryan. I raised an eyebrow as I opened the message. Ryan, you think you've won, don't you? I smirked. Me, I don't think I know. He responded immediately. Ryan, you don't know what you've done. I stared at the screen for a moment, my smirk fading. Ryan was arrogant, but he was also a coward. The kind of man who thrived on secrecy, on sneaking around behind people's backs. He had never expected to be caught in the crossfire of my patience. I typed back, me? No, Ryan. You don't know what I've done. But you're about to find out. And with that, I blocked his number too. I left the bar an hour later, the whiskey having done its job in settling the chaos in my mind. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the exhaustion hit me all at once. It wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional. Months of deception, planning, execution. It had taken everything in me to maintain my composure, to wait for the right moment, and now that the battle was over, my body was demanding rest. But first, I had one last thing to do. I walked into the house, straight to the closet, pulling out a suitcase. Methodically, I packed clothes, essentials, everything I needed to leave this place behind for a while. I wasn't going to stay in the house that Cassandra had tainted with her lies. She could have it. She could sit in the silence of an empty home, surrounded by the memories of what she had destroyed. She could stare at the empty side of the bed, realizing that the man she had once taken for granted had walked away without looking back. She could live with the consequences of her choices. As I zipped up my suitcase, I caught my reflection in the mirror. For the first time in a long time, I didn't see a man weighed down by suspicion, by doubt, by heartbreak. I saw a man who had freed himself, a man who had won. And that, I realized, was more satisfying than any revenge. The morning after the storm was eerily quiet. No arguments, no false apologies, no more carefully crafted lies. Just silence, the kind that settles deep in the bones. Final and absolute. I stood in the doorway of her house, suitcase in hand, ready to leave the past behind. Cassandra hadn't come home last night. Whether she was too ashamed, too afraid, or too desperate to avoid facing reality, I didn't care. She would return eventually, stepping into the aftermath of her own destruction, finding nothing but empty rooms and a life she had single-handedly burned to the ground. My phone buzzed, but I didn't check it. I already knew who it was, Cassandra, trying to reach me through different numbers after I had blocked her. Ryan, probably stewing in his own panic, trying to convince me that I had made a mistake. I had made no mistakes. I walked to my car, loading the suitcase into the trunk. The weight of it felt lighter than I expected, as if everything I had packed carried no real burden. The real baggage, the years of trust she had shattered, the nights I had spent doubting myself, the love that had been wasted, was left behind where it belonged. Sliding into the driver's seat, I started the car, but I didn't drive off right away. Instead, I let my gaze linger on the house, memorizing it one last time. It had once been a home, filled with laughter, shared meals, whispered promises under dim bedroom lights. Now, it was just a structure of walls and windows, devoid of meaning. I reached for my phone and, out of some morbid curiosity, opened the last message Cassandra had managed to send before I blocked her. "Cassandra, please, Adam, just talk to me. I can explain." Explained? I almost laughed. Explain how she had looked me in the eyes for months, telling me I was paranoid while she slept in another man's arms? Explain how every "I love you" had been just another line in the script of her deception? I deleted the message. There was nothing left to say. I pulled out of the driveway, the tires rolling over the pavement with a sense of finality. The house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, fading into the background of a life I was no longer a part of. Where was I going? I didn't know. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to. I wasn't running. I wasn't escaping. I was choosing. Choosing to move forward, choosing to reclaim the parts of myself that had been lost in the wreckage of my marriage. A few miles down the road, I stopped at a gas station. As I filled up the tank, I found myself watching the world around me. People going about their lives, laughing, working, talking. It struck me then how much of my time had been spent trapped in Cassandra's lies. How much of myself I had given to a woman who had never truly valued it. The realization wasn't painful, it was liberating. I went inside, grabbed a coffee, and sat down at a small table by the window. As I took the first sip, I felt something unfamiliar settle inside me. Peace. Not revenge, not triumph, just peace. Cassandra would spend the rest of her life regretting what she had done, trapped in the ruins of the future she had sabotaged. Ryan would run, as cowards always do, leaving her to pick up the pieces alone. And I would move on. Somewhere down the line, I might love again. I might trust again. But for now, I was content with the simple truth that I had survived her. I finished my coffee, stood up, and walked out without looking back. The past was behind me, and the future, mine to create.